All right, welcome to Firepunk Racing Series Part 4. This time we're going to take off where we let off at end of 2016, coming off of UCC and the Pro Street points win, and kind of go into what all we changed going into the 2017 season. This was something that we were now talking about making 3,000 horsepower at UCC, and it was the big buzz about who was going to be the first one to hit 3,000 horsepower. So that's kind of what started our thought process of thinking much bigger than what we were, because adding 1,000 horsepower when you're already at 2,000 is quite a bit. So we also decided to make some chassis changes. We had gotten confident enough in the suspension that we thought we should try to do a 4-link. And in the process, we also wanted to shed some more weight, because throughout the year with adding water injection and everything we had added in 2016, we were ending up around 4,900 pounds. And we wanted to get back down to our minimum weight of 4,500. So I guess we have Larson and Cody here with us today as well. Cody had not started working for us until 2018, but he was also at 2017 as a spectator. So we'll be able to, I wanted him to share a little bit of what his outside thought process was from outside looking in without being on the team, because we definitely put a lot of work in it. And that was something that you guys mentioned in the comments, that you wanted to go into detail about the Sigma motor that we put together for the dyno at UCC. And we'll go into some details with that. But first, let's start talking about what all did we change in the winter of 2017, leading up to 2017 for chassis changes.
Really, what we didn't change might be an easier list, but we 4-linked it. Mm-hmm. We did rack and pinion steering, and that's also when we put the Bosch on it.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, the Bosch was, we needed data logging, we needed all that stuff. So we did a lot of stuff, and then, I mean, aside from that, then we tried to go chase 3,000 horsepower. So we had a connection with Columbus Diesel, and they got us some HX82s to play with. I mean, our first plan, or our first try was going to the dyno. Actually, we were also messing with the big damper that year, because we kept having issues with the damper coming off. So we just tried a little bit of everything.
We really bit off more than we could chew, because we decided to move the engine back 14 inches. We had to redo the firewall, so we gutted the whole cab. We rack and pinion steering. We were able to lower the truck another 4 inches. And then we didn't do 9-inch axles till midsummer of 2017. But that winter, we had still done enough changes with going to the Bosch system. And then working with Exergy, Phil DeVries had been doing some injector testing on a Duramax platform that they had tried. Some changes on the injectors that picked up like 30% gain. It was like huge gains. He's like, I want to try this on the Cummins platform to see if we get the same results. And that was actually an 8-hole nozzle, which turned out that on the bench, everything was 30% better, but in real world, it was worse. It did not.
Something, I'm assuming, with the swirl, the way the air flows in a Cummins compared to a Duramax, and the bowl design and everything. You'd
think that you get better atomization, it would mix the air and the fuel better and make more power, but it did not. It made more heat and less power all throughout. The 5-hole stuff beat it all together.
So we made our first dyno trip. When was it? January maybe?
I think it was end of January, and that's when we had fabbed up the HX82s. We had not fitted them in the truck. Well, we did fit them in the truck, because that was originally when we had built the 5-inch hot pipe going out front and made it to the dyno. The goal, we had gone from 500% over injectors to 700% over injectors, and went from the small triple turbo S400s to it was like a 4.1 inch, started as a 4.3 inch charger on the manifold and a pair of 4.1 inch on the atmosphere. So we had some healthy lungs on this thing, and we were thinking, with the gain in fuel quantity and this huge air, we should be able to thump out a number. Mm-hmm. And we had nothing but problems. I think we had also had problems when we shook the tires. With the ladder bar set up and not being able to change our chassis, every time we'd bring too much power in too soon, it would chatter the tires violently, because we had so much bite in the rear axle that it wouldn't just go into controlled spin. And then when it would chatter the driveline, we would either shake converter bolts loose, crank bolts loose, or the damper would come loose. And that's when we had worked with, in 2017, Fluid Damper actually came out to the dyno with us after we had tried our, Drew at D&J had tried to make a 10-inch John Deere damper style that actually had a hub that fit over the snout of the Cummins that clamped down, not just on the face-to-face, it actually clamped over.
It had a taper design. Yeah.
Right. So
it was going to fix all of our problems.
And in reality, the design was right, but the crank was not strong enough to handle the added weight of the 10-inch damper, and it started oscillating at high RPM and to where the tone wheel hit the front cover, picked up aluminum shavings in the teeth, which lost crank signal. And so the first time we tried to roll into it on the dyno, he starts making power and the engine cuts out hard. I mean, the whole engine almost jumps off the ground, and it's very hard on parts when you lose crank signal at 2,000 horsepower. So that was really like
that
the
ended
first,
our dyno trip before it even started. Really,
Right.
I mean,
yeah, we had big plans, had to come back, kind of regroup. That's when we started talking to Fluid Damper and made the plans for the next trip to the dyno in February. It was like 3 weeks later, where Fluid Damper guys were going to come out and we were going to put a high resolution monitoring on the damper. So they put basically tape on the damper surface to where they have 250 tones of resolution. And then the flywheel on the back, we read it off the teeth. So we had about around 250 tones on the back as well. So it was extremely high resolution to where we could see what the crank's actually doing and what the viscous dampening cycle actually was. Should see if I could pull up some of that data, but it was pretty cool because they could change had a couple different dampers with different viscosity of fluids inside of it. And that really changed the oscillation wave of the harmonics going through the engine.
I remember hearing crank deflection from front to back.
Yeah.
When we were under power, like 2-3 degrees almost.
We were 3 degrees. So if you compared the RPM from the front of the damper to the back of the damper, when the engine was making over 2,000 horsepower, we were seeing 3 degrees of deflection in the crank. So that would mean that if your injection timing is read off the crank at the front, that means cylinder number 6 is getting 3 degrees more timing than what the front cylinders are because of the way the whole crank was twisting. And that was stuff that, I mean, nobody had that information before because nobody went to the bother of doing that kind of data, but Fluid Damper was willing to come out and give us that information because they really wanted to try to get the harmonics as good as they can.
That's where the full power pack that a lot of guys run kit comes from now. And I believe they actually changed up the harmonics inside the damper some.
The fluid in the Fluid Damper is so thick that they had a 1/2-inch steel ball bearing that they put in a pint jar with their fluid. At the beginning of the day, they dropped the ball in there and put the lid on it. And it wasn't until the end of the day that ball had fallen all the way down through the fluid. Really? That's how thick the fluid in that Fluid Damper is. And just changing the thickness, the viscosity of the fluid, we are able to change the harmonic range. Pretty much in an inline 6, there's always going to be a rough spot in harmonics that is going to be worse than the others. And we were able to move that out a lot further to where we didn't, by the time you got in the high RPM, where you got in that bad harmonic range, the overall tones were a lot lower because the engine was spinning that much faster. So with that, they made the full power kit. We did the friction washer that significantly helps. And since we did that testing with Fluid Damper and have used that has pretty much completely eliminated all of our Fluid Damper coming loose problems, even if we shake the tires. And we sell that to a lot of customers, and the whole industry benefited from a session like that on the dyno because somebody like Fluid Damper takes that information back and uses it to better their products that we put on daily drivers.
So we got that figured out and then started blowing up turbos, right?
Yeah, that was kind of confusing to us. Mark Massey was the one that we were working with at Columbus Diesel at the time. And he had put a lot of these triple turbos together for the super stock trucks and for the tractors. Pretty much we'd come into boost, and as soon as the 241 atmospheres would hit 40, 50 pounds of boost, and then we would watch the manifold charger shaft speed go from 90,000 RPM down to 75,000 RPM and just break clean off. It'd break the shaft, stop the wheel, straighten its tracks. Take it all apart, and the compressor wheel literally looked perfect, like barely a scar on it. But what was happening, we had this 5-inch hot pipe because we had the turbos all the way out front. The only thing we could think of that was different than all the other setups is there was so much velocity, wasn't enough velocity to where there was no drive pressure going to the big chargers out front until the RPMs reached, I don't know, we were starting the run at 5,000 RPM and running at 5,500. So pretty much when it started making boost, it pretty much, the front chargers hit so hard that when all the air comes in and hits the manifold turbo compressor wheel, it was trying to stop the wheel because the pressure increased so rapidly and it would just break the wheel. Whereas the triple setups that they had on the tractors was just a small hot pipe and everything was able to play nice. And we feel that theory was correct because we went from a 5-inch hot pipe to a 4-inch hot pipe, and that fixed our problem.
So did we do that the same time? Like, had we tried that on the common rail at all, or did we not try that until we went to
the common rail?
So what made us decide that the common rail didn't work? Or, I mean, at some point we gave up.
We had gone, this was the third time back to the dyno because it was one time for the damper broke and that aborted. So then the next time we went back to the dyno with fluid damper. Mm-hmm.
And that was probably, we had small turbos on for some of that testing, right?
Yeah, we still had the small turbos on because we just wanted to eliminate some of the variables. And me and Lynn were the only ones that were at the dyno. I don't think you guys were involved back there.
I didn't even make the trip to the dyno for some of those. I mean, I know I did the first one. I'm not sure if I did the second two or, anyway.
But we, all together, by the time we got through all of these problems that we were having, it was just a bunch of little gremlins. We were 3 weeks away from the dyno, or from UCC.
Imagine that, something last minute for UCC.
Crazy. So we're 3 weeks away. We're not anywhere near 3,000 horsepower. I think when we put the HX82s on there, we ended up coming up like 2,200 horsepower. It was like way low. And we're like, this isn't going to work. Like, we were at 2,000 horsepower last year. We've only gained 200 horsepower. The goal is to gain 1,000 horsepower. And the next step was go back, revisit the injectors, because we were starting to, at that point, we're like, maybe these injectors really aren't what they're cracked up to be. If we'd have known everything, we should have just popped last year's 500% in it, because that's what we ended up doing later in the year, and the truck ran phenomenally. That's when we first ran 7s. But we're sitting around at the dyno, all kind of discouraged, and Mark Massey's like, we do 3,000 horsepower mechanical setups every day. And Drew's like, I got a motor at the shop I could put together. And I was like, that kind of makes sense. But I said, I don't have a motor. I don't have a pump. I don't have turbos. So it's up to you guys. And Mark and Drew were both there like, we know it can make 3,000 horsepower. Be easy. Like, Mark's like, I got a 17 millimeter billet Sigma pump back there I'll let you use. And I'll sponsor the turbos for the event. Like, he was just letting us borrow them basically to go out and make a number and put it on there. So the goal was, we wanted a solid 3,000 horsepower, no questions asked. And because we were 3 weeks from the event, we knew that if we went back with another revision with the common rail and came back to the dyno and fell short, we were out of time at that point. Mm-hmm. So the goal was, leaving the dyno, was go back and throw a mechanical setup together and make a big number. Because Mark's like, we can make 3,600 horsepower. Like, that shouldn't be a problem. That's pretty easy to talk me into that, because that sounds like pretty sweet. Because we're like, now we can really lay the smack down. And that's kind of what we came back to do. But we did not have time to put that setup together and put it in the truck.
Right. We never put that setup in the truck. We kind of said that we'd fabbed up the turbos. It was the same turbo setup. So we're like, we know those are going to fit. The rest of it, we think we can do some measuring, and we can hopefully, cross our T's and dot our I's and not miss anything.
It was still a common rail block, 24 valve setup. I mean, it was an enforcer motor with a mechanical front cover on it, so we could pretty much.
Some of our bigger concerns were the valve cover and the top feed injectors, making sure that was going to clear everything. And we did discover, I'm pretty sure we knew ahead of time that we weren't going to have room to put any kind of lifting bar above it and get it in underneath the firewall with everything being tucked back in so far. So our plan was that the axle
The front axle.
Yeah, just drop the front axle out and pick the truck up on the lift and just drop it out from the bottom and put the new one in from underneath. And so that's what I think we ended up. We had some pallets stacked up and set the engine up fairly high.
We took the engine mounts off, set the truck down, bolted the engine mounts on, and then we could jack the thing around where we could get it in. It was, but that's a whole other. I mean, we'll get to that. But going to I want to kind of go over the engine dyno and what that theory was, because when we went back, now we have a monster setup. We have a setup that we know can make over 3,000 horsepower, but we wanted to put it on the dyno just to be 100% sure that the timing was right and the turbos weren't going to blow up and all that stuff. So we started with the fuel turned all the way back. I think first rip made 2,600. Mark put a little bit more fuel in it, and I think we bumped the timing a little bit and made 2,800. They had me driving the dyno because I was going to drive the truck, and I'd never driven a Sigma motor before. If you've never driven a Sigma motor before, it is a lot more difficult than it looks on the outside, because when before it's on the governor coming up through, when you hear the chop of the engine, you have to be extremely gentle, because if you just crack the throttle a tick too much, it overfuels the engine and it shuts off and you have to restart it. And you actually have to start it on ether with the fuel kill pulled, and once it runs on ether, turn the fuel pump on to make it run. Like they're finicky pumps, but they will deliver some fuel and make some power. So I was driving it on the dyno, and the goal was simply just to make sure that it's a proven 3,000 horsepower setup, because they're like, we're going to go on the dyno and with a proven setup, and then we can even spray it if we want to make more, just to be sure. And I think the third revision, we pretty much rolled into it as soon as it came in the booth, bent the stick over. I saw 3,000 horsepower, let right back off of it. And like, we never even bent the stick over and saw what it would do. And we'll show you the dyno graph. The dyno graph is going straight up, crosses 3,000 horsepower when we let right back off of it. Like, we're like, okay, this thing's going to make, it was going to make a big number. But we were too close to the event to even risk tearing up the motor, anything. We're like, all we need to do is make one big whack on it and get the thing back off. So that's how we went to UCC with the common rail in it for racing. And then we have a guns loaded big Sigma motor setup that we're going to pop in Friday night overnight, go to the dyno, lay down a monster number, and then swap it back to a common rail for sled pulling, just because we knew that's what worked. We didn't want to take a chance of trying to sled pull with a torque converter, because getting up through the torque converter with the Sigma pump was impossible. I mean, it would have taken a lot of trial and error, and we didn't have time to figure out what stall converter we needed and all that stuff. But in our minds, this was a great idea. And in reality, we were nuts.
And looking back, it's like we literally almost set ourselves up for disaster, because a well-tested setup is always better than
oh man,
the latest and greatest of everything. So yeah, went to UCC, and first event was the drag racing, and in true form, it almost bit us in the butt.
Yeah.
We spent most of the day just launching and the truck falling on its face. We changed injectors and pumps, and we were
pretty much, we'd launch, everything was good. As soon as you'd launch, rail pressure would tank, the truck would nose over, and then it would come back. But it was enough that it would knock our 60 foot down. We couldn't figure it out. And finally, after we changed injectors, pumps, new feed tubes, like we had spare parts there, and that probably hurt us, because when you have spare parts there, we're like, let's just throw it. We were just throwing it at the wall and hoping that we weren't accurately dying. We should have just slowed down, thought this through. And after we changed everything and it still didn't work, then we sat down and thought about it, and we're like, what did we change? And we started looking at fuel cell, because we had gone from a 15-gallon fuel cell in the back to a 2.5-gallon fuel cell in the front. Well, while it was half full, and what was happening, we were launching and it was sloshing around and it was sucking air. And all we did to fix the problem was fill that thing chuck full.
Stupid. So that happened 2 years in a row then?
Was that 2018?
Yeah, because the year, the first year.
So that was 2018. Then.
Okay.
Yeah,
Never mind.
The first
Once
year
again,
that
I got things mixed
I guess
up.
I was.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I didn't realize that
No,
happened.
no,
too.
that was
Okay.
2018.
So I got that
then.
No,
mixed
you're
up
fine.
then.
I was
So
thinking
did drag
about that.
racing go well? I mean, I don't remember.
Yeah, no,
Well,
you guys.
it went decent, but we went like at 863, remember? Because we had the 8-hole injectors in it. It was extremely smoky, extremely hot. We couldn't figure out why it wasn't making power. Because that was with the 8-hole injectors that, like, the exhaust, the hot pipe on the turbos was glowing red on the dyno. And we couldn't figure out why the thing was so hot. We could not cool it down. Even with water injection, we couldn't cool it down. And every time we added water, it would make less power. It would cool it down, but also make less power. And we were like trying to find a balance between running a number. But luckily, the other competitors didn't really have their stuff together because we were still able to win the drag race portion with like a 860.
Was that year? Was there eliminations that year? Or was that still just? Was
That
it
was
just
heads-
2018?
That was just
That was
2018.
just heads up.
Yeah, it was still heads up.
So it's just time trials.
Yeah.
In 2017 still.
I think that's how I remember it. I mean, I'll go back and look at the information, but I'm pretty sure that's accurate that we went like an 860 something because I remember feeling fairly discouraged that we went slower the second year than we did the first year. Because the first full quarter mile pass this truck ever made in 2016 and went 827, and we weren't able to better that until after UCC.
Yeah.
In 2017, when we put the 5-hole injectors back in it, we put the 2016 injectors back in it and went 799 in Oklahoma.
Here comes LaVon Miller. Come on, 166 and 816. Firepunk diesel. Trying to punk out Dustin Jackson. And it's just qualifying round number 1. My God, we've got a day's worth of racing out of these guys. He's faster at the 8th. Oh my!
And like we had the injector sitting in the toolbox.
So we were so focused on the dyno that we didn't have time to do our homework and make sure that our new great injectors were really
when
that
you
great.
take a set of injectors that's 700%, you're like, bigger has to be better. And that's where you just learn that it's not always, things aren't always, just because somebody says they have 1,000% over injectors, it really doesn't mean that much. And actually right now we're running 400% overs in the S10 and have gone faster than we've ever had.
We've really come around to less fuel quantity and more nitrous and paying a lot more attention to air-fuel ratio. We didn't know what air-fuel ratio was back then, barely.
No.
I mean, it was definitely a black freight train with those 8-hole injectors. I do remember that.
Yeah. We watched those videos and it's kind of cringeworthy that like we had it all right there. It's just we didn't have the knowledge.
I mean, we were still racing on air only.
Yeah. Fuel
maybe
only.
a little, I don't know. Whenever we put the GT55 on it is when we went to a little bit of nitrous to help get it off the line. But
I believe that was in Tulsa when we added the NHRDA, wasn't it? When we added the GT55 and then added a little bit of nitrous
when we
to
first
it.
put that one on.
That was when we had taken the compounds off to try to put the
single
on.
We put
We
the
did
single
try
on.
to run a single.
Yeah, that was when
Was
Edgar,
that 2018?
That would have been 2018 when we went out to it would have been Oklahoma. Yeah,
We tried all kinds of things in 2018.
We heard a bunch of stuff that was
Fireballed it pretty good.
that's a good one.
Anyways,
Well,
racing.
Yeah, we're just trying to
UCC.
remember, trying to keep this in chronological order is the hard part. But that was racing for the day, and we finished out on top. Not a stellar performance. And then that night we went to Columbus Diesel shop in Indiana. That was before they had. That was when you were allowed to go to a shop.
We may or may not have made that
I think-
rule.
I think
Probably.
We went to the shop and started pulling it apart. I remember, I mean, it was at late by the time we got there. It was 9:30 or so by the time we got there. And by 11:30, we had that truck bare frame, both rear axle, front axle.
Well, it was, we had it torn apart, but it was Firepunk, D&J, and then whoever of our friends were there.
And some sled puller, different sled
We had,
pullers were there.
30 people working on this thing, it seemed like.
Hostler
20.
boys were there. Herman Kramer was there. I mean, a lot of local guys that had taken interest in our project. They were all along for the ride, and everybody threw in their hat into helping with the team. It was really a team effort. It was cool to see, and it was a ton of fun until about 2 o'clock in the morning when everybody started dropping like flies. Everybody was like, well, going to the hotel. And then soon all of a sudden we had like a graveyard crew there. We're going like, we still got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, we had tried to pretty much split the core of the people up in halves. And the first half we told them to go sleep for a while. And we were going to do a switch in the, 3 o'clock in the morning or something. And then I think myself and maybe Drew were going to try to make it the whole night. We didn't really do much of anything, but our job was pretty much just to keep sure everything that
tied together.
Just make sure that everything, answer questions and make sure that things don't get missed and overlooked. So some of the stuff I remember from that night, we had to run to Napa or somewhere the next morning. We had to get a jumper cables because we needed a battery to power our hydraulic power steering pump.
Yeah.
Because when we put the 12 valve in it, we didn't have a power steering.
It was a 24 valve or 20 Sigma motor.
I'm sorry. 24 valve Sigma motor.
Don't use the word 12 valve.
Sigma's going far enough. 12 is a whole different subject. Yeah. But there was no provisions for power steering, and we felt like we would need. Definitely felt like we need the power brakes for the dyno. So there was some. I don't know. It was
We had a whole
ratchet
list.
strap.
We had a whole list of I just remember a cardboard tear off of a box, and it was like John Deere ether, and it was like a shitload of it. And we were like kind of throughout the night, anything we thought of that we needed, and then we had a pretty good parts list by the morning of things that we needed.
Really, we didn't run into any major like oopses. I think we had
things we didn't really think about and didn't have pre-made was like a throttle. We had a throttle handle and we had a cable, but we didn't have it mounted. Mm-hmm. And so we're like, wow, we'll figure it out when we got out there. And I remember we mounted it to the racing seat, which was aluminum. And by the time you bend the sticko after the dyno, that thing was bent as could be because it just wasn't strong enough. Turns out pushing against the rack on a Sigma motor, it's like it's a push. It's like you're leaning against the back of your seat, pushing everything you can. It's not just like you're pushing the gas pedal. Those are things that I had no idea, and I was nervous because we had to lay down a number, and I had never done it before, and but man, when we first fired that thing up at the shop on Saturday morning, you talk about 30 guys that have, it was
pretty cool.
Very excited.
It was daybreak kind of. It was still pretty early in the morning, and we were all cold and dead tired and all that stuff, but I can still just see, a half circle standing outside and this thing firing up and yet sitting there doing its loping, chopping.
The driver's door is just sitting there shaking. Oh, man.
The feeling and the sound just never gets old.
Yeah. Jersey was back there in the background.
I don't remember, was it Friday night or Saturday night that Jersey ended up with a steak in his hoodie pocket? Because, I don't know, we had steaks for dinner. They had gone to steak.
Somebody had a steak in their leftover.
I actually think some of them had gone to dinner and he had leftovers. So he wrapped it up and put it in his hoodie pocket, and then middle of the night, he's sitting there with a butane torch heating it up so he could keep the fire going. Y'all haven't hung out with Jersey. He's always good for a morale booster.
Yeah, never a dull moment around that guy. They make him different out east. But no, so pretty much got everything loaded up, and then put it on the open trailer without the front bumper on it or front clip. We had to load it up. Can't remember what it was that we wouldn't.
It probably didn't have a front bumper on it, or who knows.
Right.
Yeah.
But I just remember rolling in. We rolled in over at UCC at maybe 11 o'clock.
Because we were able to dyno last.
Right.
So,
okay.
But I know
it was a little bit later because I remember walking around in the morning and watching a bunch of people dyno, and then like
mid-forenoon, roughly, probably.
About that time.
Get it up, baby. You hear that? Full swap, 12 hours. Yeah, baby. Come on, baby.
And man, you talk about drawing a crowd quickly because we pulled in there with the with the gooseneck, and nobody really knew what we were doing. That was when Power Driven they were building the Godfather, and they had this big mechanical setup and talking about how common rail versus mechanical, and little did they know that we had a common rail. We were bringing a mechanical setup to compete against them. And, it was fun. Like, I don't know, because we just kept all this stuff under our hats until the day of. And when we started this thing we got it off the trailer, backed it up the pits, and we decided to do a warm up on it on jack stands because we hadn't even ever shifted through the gears. And Drew was concerned that we were able to, even drive the thing up on the dyno and be able to get it up through the gears. And so we put it on jack stands, put it in drive, 10 cans of ether to get the thing going.
Yeah.
And
we first just did a warm up outside and without going through the gears or anything. And then that's when it started pushing oil out of the stack.
Right.
Turns out we had a scavenge pump for our front low mount turbos, and the plumbing wasn't quite right to where I think there was a line kink or something. And so the oil was backing up in the turbo, pushing through the seal and wet stacking. So everybody that was standing around watching it got speckles of oil all over everything. And at first we're kind of freaking out because we didn't know where it was coming from at that point. So we quickly pushed it in under the canopy and started digging, and turns out that was a fairly simple solution. And then we had enough time that we thought, somebody had this brilliant idea of we really should probably go through the gears. And
I'm glad we did, because we'd have got on the dyno and not been able to do it.
I mean, it was really close.
Pretty much I'd get it up, go first gear, and wind the thing up to, 3,500 RPM, just get the engine to smooth out, go to second. But man, when I went to third, it would lock the converter in second. And when I would go to third, every time I clicked into third, it would overfuel the motor and it would shut off. And Drew is freaking out because he's like, we just screwed ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We have this big setup, but we can't even shift the thing through the gears. And it was Darren Morrison that was sitting there watching this whole thing. And he's had a Sigma motor in his race truck because he had an S10 that he had raced and had set a lot of records with it. And he comes over and he's like, try 5,500 RPM. And I was like, 5,500? He's like, yeah, 5,500. So wind that thing up, 5,500, click the third, it takes it like a champ. And I'm like, all right, this thing is meant to play. So we just figured out you got to swing some RPMs to make it happy. And that was pretty much our only practice that we had. And luckily we did that, because if we'd have been on the dyno, Darren wouldn't have been able to come up there and tell us and all that stuff, and it would have been an epic failure. But that was all together. It was like all of UCC, I feel like, stopped when they heard what was going on, because it made a commotion. Just the truck sitting out there chopping at idle and doing that kind of practicing. I have good memories of that, like looking around and looking up at the grandstands, and everybody's lined up on top looking out at the pits. And there was probably 500 people packed around the pits. It was tons of people.
I don't remember just a whole lot of how dyno day went with everybody else, whatever. I remember the whole warming up thing and almost that. And then I remember actually being on the dyno. But Cody, what was what do you remember from that day? What were some of the big numbers I don't even remember who made big numbers or.
I know Sean was there, and he put up a decent.
Sean made 24.
Yeah, he won He won the dyno that year. There were some good running trucks, but then because I was in the grandstands, and I had I knew Lars a little bit before I had started, obviously, but so I had seen the truck in the shop, and he had hinted at something, I think a long time. It's been so long that I hardly remember, but I know I'd asked him, "Are you guys doing something?" He's like, "Yeah, we're putting something together," and whatnot. So, I heard when I was in the grandstands, kind of on the farther side, and walking, it's like I've said it a couple of times, walk up to the top of the grandstands, because it's because word had kind of gotten out the Firepunk was swapping engine, whatever, blah, blah. And so standing up at the top of the grandstand, I still wish I would have taken a picture of it, because it was a pretty impressive picture. I had been around tractors and stuff and, Sigma pumps and whatnot, but actually seen it in a truck, and then just the mass amount of people, because it was so cold that UCC.
That was a miserable weekend.
Well, everybody was in the little tents, Fleece had their tents and everything. But as soon, the first 15 seconds, when I got to the top of the grandstands, there was nothing but where we were pitted, it was just
covered.
Everybody. And, it was looking at it from that, outside in, at the time I was like, damn, It's it's pretty cool to see. I mean, and watching it make a dyno pool, and now looking at it from the inside, I see a lot more of it. But trying to get that power to stick through a 48, if the power loss was directly through that or whatever it could have been, there's so many factors, but no, I mean, it was by far the coolest. I mean, you could tell the engine makes well north of 3,000 horsepower just by it ripping on the dyno. But yeah, no, I mean, it was by far probably the highlight of, being to, I think, 3 or 4 UCCs now. And it's like, that's still one staple that's like, that was, that kind of put like the wow factor to it to me. I mean, it's
that was cool. There's no denying about it. Like looking back, it was completely wild and nuts of us to do that, but that was something that I'll take to my grave, because that the amount of adrenaline rush you get out of something like that, because you just don't know, and like how crazy it was. But when we go up there and lay it down on the dyno, and we ended up doing 2399. I pretty much stayed in it till 6,500 RPM and let off of it, and coming back and looking at the data, because we still had the Bosch hooked up to the crank sensor and everything, so I could see boost, EGT, RPM, and so I pulled it to 6,500 RPM, and the second I let off the throttle, it dropped to 5,400 RPM. So like we had 900 RPM of slip somewhere, either in the trans or in the tires, or the rim spinning on the tire. Something was slipping. We know the truck made the power, but we didn't get it to the ground. And that was, as disappointing as it was, it really gave us the understanding that the dyno is not just a tool that you can put 3,000 horsepower on and lay it over. It's about how you hit it. It's about getting the power curve quickly. It's about
having the right tires, having it strapped right. I mean, there's so many different things.
It's a game. At that power level, it's not like a 600 horsepower truck. I can put a 600 horsepower truck on the dyno and just creep it through the run, no problem, and it's accurate every time. But when you have that much power, you have to come into it and hit the nitrous just right, or like in that setup, it was a big turbo setup, and the dyno couldn't hold it. And I don't think the dyno couldn't hold it, but I think it was tire to roller, or either the rim spinning in the tire or the transmission was slipping. Which we tore the transmission apart that night. No clutches were burnt, but in a 2-second dyno run, you could probably slip a clutch without actually showing burn marks. But those were, I don't know, it was still a monumental day, and we got second place on the dyno because Baca still beat us with a common rail. So if you're watching this, common rails are still better. But honestly, like raw horsepower, you cannot beat that for a Sigma motor. But for racing, the control of a common rail and being able to ramp in power and have the air-fuel ratio control and stuff, you have to have control of your power to be able to race and do it well.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
I don't feel threatened. You could take any budget you want, and I don't feel like we're going to get beat in Pro Mod by a mechanical power plant ever.
You just said that 5 years.
Dan and Jared might argue with you.
Bring it on.
No, it is funny though, looking at it like from both sides. Like, I mean, before I had really started, I wasn't into, like common rail over mechanical stuff. Like, I was die-hard mechanical guy for, as long as I could, even up to the point of working here. Like, I had a common rail truck, but and now like you can pay me enough money to put a mechanical setup of, a sort in most racing applications anymore nowadays, because the control is just, it's crazy. So
anytime if you're racing at a power level that you can go full power, build 20 pounds of boost and go full power off the hit and then not break the tires loose and run, mechanical setup is comparable to common rail. But at whatever point you have enough power that if you go full fuel off the line and as soon as everything comes on, the boost comes in and it blows the tires off, now the control is what makes you fast, because you have to be able to build a ramp to get to peak power. And there's a lot of guys that have come a long way on mechanical stuff. Like Adam Foltz has done very well, Dan Scheid's done very well, and there's a lot of good running mechanical setups out there, but the control of the common rail is king. Just all there's to it.
For sure.
Yeah, so dyno ended up going decent. Obviously, once again, not the results we wanted, but so we're coming out of drag racing with a first, then dyno with a second, going to the sled pull. Obviously, we had to go back and do the same thing all over again. Put the common rail engine back in it, plus put the sled pull setup in it.
I remember a lot of people giving us a bunch of crap about like you had the best sled pulling combination you could ever want, and you took it out for sled pulling. But I answered that question earlier, and it was because of the torque converter. Because we thought about putting an NV4500 or drop box and reverser in it, and it was
just too much unknowns and stuff that we hadn't been able to test, and so we went back to what we thought we knew for the most part. And once again, I mean, I don't remember, like, that was pretty uneventful that night, I believe. I just just remember a lot of guys, once again, pitching in. I mean, I believe Evan Davis and the sled pulling guys pretty much took care of all of our gear change stuff. We didn't even have to worry about any of that.
They did the gear. I mean, I think they had the gear ratio, or the ring and pinion swap done in about an hour and a half. Him and Adam Halion, and I think Kyle Hosteller and some of those guys were maybe helping. I can't really remember.
I can't remember.
What do you remember about helping those nights? Like, what was your perspective of those? Do you have anything that we didn't cover that you remember?
Not really, other than, we were the ones that put it together. And so everybody who's helping, you kind of direct more than you're actually working. You find parts, but I just remember standing back and just seeing everybody as a team working together.
Right.
And it wouldn't have been possible without all of that help.
Right. It was a lot, because we had also double-checked the trans after. So I know Dibbles went through the trans. We had a high stall torque converter that we had for the dyno and for the sled pull. But getting it all back together again that night, it was the same thrash. Obviously, I think going back to the common rail setup the second night was easier because we didn't have to add all this extra stuff. So the Sigma motor swap was the hard part, because adding all the extra stuff. I just remember how much work really went into it. It was wild.
Yeah, and then sled pull was still both pull or best out of two. How was that?
It was best out of two.
Yeah,
best out of two. And I don't remember where we were in the order or anything, but I don't think it really mattered that much, because that was the year of the carbon drive shaft.
Was it?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, because the last year we actually ended up with a good sled.
Yeah.
So we had, once again, done race car things and put a carbon fiber front drive shaft in the truck. And first pull went out, and it was a decent pull right up until to the end when the truck started to pull down. Like, it really just kind of stopped. And one of the guys thought they saw the front tires stock before the rears.
Yeah.
So we went back to the pits. Typically, if nothing's wrong, you'll just stay there in the infield of the track. But drug it back to the pits. We put it up on jack stands and put the thing in drive, and wouldn't you know, like, all the tires are driving.
Yeah.
And
I remember, Evan was like, something broke.
We even held a tire and tried to push fronts, and nothing. So we're like, all right, well, it checks out. Must have been, I don't know. We should have checked it out harder, I guess. But we didn't know what to look for, because everything seemed to be working just fine. Like, ring and pinion wasn't making any noise, wasn't anything of that nature. So went back for pull 2, and nothing. It just walked out of the hole and didn't go much of anywhere.
We figured out that we broke our front drive shaft on our first hook. As you can see, we spent some good money on a carbon fiber drive shaft for drag racing, which we thought was a great idea. But apparently, $1,300 drive shaft is not good for sled pulling, and we should have gone back and put our spare aluminum one in, but we just didn't catch it. We made it, 180 feet or something like that, the second pull.
Right. But I mean, the first pull luckily was good enough to have our spot.
Because it takes your combined distance between your, if you have 300 feet the first time.
It's your best. You pick your best.
Oh, really?
You only count one. 2 tries and you get to count 1. So we had gone, I don't know, I think we got a 5th or a 6th place out of it, I believe. But turns out our carbon fiber front drive shaft is bonded to an aluminum hub at the end, and that has broken loose and so it was just spinning. Well, apparently when it cooled down enough and it's on jack stands and doesn't have a lot of load on it, that thing could hold on enough to where when we're free spinning it, it spun the tires just fine. But the minute you put any kind of load on it, it broke. But
that was a hindsight thing.
We had a really nice aluminum spare drive shaft in the trailer that if we'd only known, or if we would have just done it, we could have put it in there. But
we still won. So luckily we had done good enough, like being at the top of the drag race and scored high enough in the dyno that we had a big enough points lead. Because that was the year, I don't think, like Baca beat us on the dyno, but then he also didn't score that high on the drag strip that year. I think he was running in the 9s. I think that year, he went fast, 880s or something in 2018.
Yep. In 2018 he went.
So, it all worked out.
2018 it went to 8th mile then.
Yeah, that is true.
No, it was still quarter mile. We went 7.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
We went 7.
You're right.
788 and 181.
Yep, because we put the 488s out front, and that was screaming.
Yeah. Made like 188 pounds of dude.
I remember looking at the log, and I was like, man, that's...
Yeah, but it was a lot.
So, we haven't even touched on 2018 yet, but...
well, and I think a lot of the things, like 2018 was after 2017, then 2018,
you guys were burnout.
We were
100%.
We were just like,
we're going to make this as easy as possible.
Right. Yep. We're like, we're not. And it really burned us out in 2017. All that work, like it takes a lot. The 3 trips to the engine dyno, fixing all these parts. I mean, financially and sleep, we lost a lot of money and sleep. And all to do 2,399 horsepower on the chassis dyno was like a Debbie Downer. We're just like, the chassis dyno is stupid. I ain't doing that no more. Because if you go to the track, it can prove your horsepower. You go to the engine dyno, it can prove your horsepower. But you have all these variables in a chassis dyno, and that leaves a sour taste in your mouth after you do all that work and spend all that time and money.
So I guess kind of quickly to wrap up 2017, racing in 2017, you'd mentioned a little bit earlier, we put the 500% back in when we went to Oklahoma.
And then we got beat by Dustin Jackson in points that year.
Yep.
He wore us out.
We could always qualify with him
and
typically qualify ahead of him.
Yeah.
But we couldn't get off the starting line with him, and
that was a 2-wheel drive. That was the old Hustle New Flow, the Ford Lightning with a turbo 400. So he was leaving on trans brake. We could run like 5.0s a couple times in qualifying. By the time we got to the finals, the trans was getting tired, and we would run like a 5-teen, and he would run just. I mean, we were always good races.
He had a bracket truck. I mean, that truck just made trips every time down, and
But it was. We still learned a lot. And we went fast consistently because that's when we went to 9-inch axles. Rocky Top is when we debuted it with the 9-inch axles. And then that we went a 511 at 141 miles an hour. Yeah. And we blew the head gasket out the back. That's when we stretched 6 head bolts on the back and literally a whole chunk of the head gasket.
That whole phenomenon was still a little bit weird. We're not quite sure.
Never really figured out what happened there, but we put it back together with new head studs and hasn't really had a problem since then. But I just remember making that pass, and right before the traps, it was like a 12-gauge shotgun went off and came back to the end, jumped out, looked in through the inner fender, and I could see a chunk of the head gasket hanging out. And I was like, guess we're done for today.
And a lot of that, looking at the data then, was based on, or because of the new axles. Like with the old axles, going to the new axles, we saved, I think, 110 pounds of rotating weight. And so looking at the RPMs in the data log, with the old axles, it would kind of roll over in the shifts, like it wasn't crisp. And then with that less rotating weight, the transmission was actually able to get a hold of stuff, and it was pulling the engine down a lot quicker and harder.
We dropped it down to like 3,800 RPM in the overdrive shift, and I think it was just making way too much torque, and that's what made the cylinder pressure go sky high and chucked it out. And that's why we talk about moving the RPM curve to the right. You know, if you shifted at 5,500 RPM in an overdrive shift, it'll still suck it down to 4,300 RPM because overdrive's a big change. That's why in the turbo 400 stuff we run now, we don't have overdrive, and it's just less gear ratio. So less RPM drops you can get, the longer your engine's going to last when you're making big power. I don't know. We did a bunch of other stuff in 2017. We did a lot of racing, but 2018 we really didn't change too much in the wintertime. I can't really remember for sure.
I mean, during the season 2017, I'm pretty sure is when we would have first put the GT55 on the manifold.
Yeah, went to the 102 millimeter GT55 on the manifold with the pair of, well, that would have been 2018 we had that.
2018, okay.
I think we had S400s all of 2017.
Wasn't it that winter that you guys had the engine explosion? Because the turbos,
end of 2017.
Yeah, 17 is when you had the explosion, because that's when we got the wall all the pipes were all bent. Yeah, we're putting it all back together in the truck.
That was Lon's Waller.
Yeah. T-Waller. Oh man, if I wish I had a video of that one. That'd be a good one to plug in there for sure.
Yeah, when we were fixing all of that back up and trying to put the pipes back together and all that stuff, there was a bracket that wasn't quite lining up, and there was
lots of things.
Yeah, there was a Saturday night that we were all here working, and
I was working. You guys were sitting there. You guys were all sitting there laughing at me. Okay. I was like, "Give me a step bit. I'll make it fit." And I make it fit, and they still make fun of me.
He was over there in the press with the hot pipe, because the hot pipe was all sandwiched up. He was over there in the press pressing it back out. I was like, "Hey, it worked. It was on there for a whole another year."
Yeah, I put a long pipe in the hot pipe, and we bend it back out. So talking about the engine explosion, that was something that went viral, and a lot of people that are familiar with Firepunk would remember the engine dyno explosion we had. And that was the engine that we ran, for UCC. That whole summer, we raced with it all year. Everything was great. And Exergy had put together 3 different sets of injectors. That's when we were just coming on board with Hot Shot Secret. They wanted to do oil analysis tests on the dyno with their Adrenaline Racing Series oil. And Johnny Gilbert had sent us a pair of 5-blade 85s to test on the atmosphere. So we had 3 different sets of injectors. We had an oil test we wanted to do, and we had turbos that we wanted to swap out. So we're like, let's just pull the motor out. Everything's healthy. Let's go to the engine dyno, do a couple quick tests. That way, we're ready for 2018. Well, it's quite broken.
But by the time we hit you
I think we win the award
Your data?
for the most carnage that you can do. That's still hot. And
it's supposed to be a simple trip to the dyno.
Yeah.
Nothing special.
Simple trip to the dyno. Yep.
It's never a simple trip to the dyno.
And the third pull in, it was crossing 2,200 horsepower, and it split at the bottom and just banana peeled. Just
I didn't mean to bring that up. You were trying to.
No, I definitely.
You were saying stuff that happened that winter, and I was like, well, I think, but.
Yeah, that was it made for a good or bad explosion video footage, and that's devastating, because you were just going over there to do some quick testing, and now everything you've ever worked for is just laying in this dyno floor, like coated in oil.
I mean, it's not just an engine, the amount of things that it wrecked.
Right. It tore the wiring harness, the ECM bounced off the ceiling and landed on the crankshaft. The turbo covers were smashed, and Johnny still has that in his bathroom that he uses. So he didn't even charge me for it. I wrecked his turbos, and I said, "Here, sorry, I broke it." I didn't send me a bill, so thanks, Johnny. So he took one for the team, I guess. Everything was broken. Like, we needed a new block, we needed new pistons, we needed new rods,
the timing housing's broken. It's just everything is broken. Literally, it was bad.
Yeah, it was a $60,000 day or more probably, but altogether we started over fresh for 2018 and put that motor together, and that motor has been a champion because it won UCC, and then it won. I think we won points in 2018. I can't remember.
Nope, we got second again to Dustin Jackson.
Okay.
The only year we won points, I'm pretty sure Pro Street was the first year.
Yeah.
So, but it raced Pro Street all of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2019, it went into charity case.
Yeah.
And so it raced 590 in Charity Case in 2019.
For a few minutes at least.
590.
It did go 590 a couple
It did.
times.
Hey, it went 590 on the dot too. But
Right, and it lost. How'd you lose that? He went 5-9-0-0-0.
I'll even get it was.
But he lost to a girl because he slept at the tree.
Yep. That little Ford Lightning. It came freight training around.
Came back to haunt you.
I think we all see that lightning in our sleep.
Oh,
It just
man, it's
haunts
rough.
us.
It was 5-9. It was 4 zeros after on the time slip, and I was like, oh, that's a misprint. No way.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But then after that, in fall of 2019, that blem block that Drew had put together in the quad cab, when we first put it in the, like after we took it out in 2015 from DPC, that block had made it 2016, 17, 18, and it made it 4 seasons. And I gave a customer a ride, went around the block, and when I parked it, I noticed there was a little oil leak. So I was just like, don't worry about it. And later that night, I went out and looked, trying to figure out where this oil leak was coming from. And you could see down behind the ECM, there was like a small hairline crack that it was leaking from. So it was like starting to break down in the main webbing. It seems to be it's just the weakest link on those stock blocks. So I grabbed the Pro Street motor because Charity Case had wrecked the rear end and it was a disaster. And I was like, I didn't feel like spending money on the quad cab. So I just grabbed the Pro Street motor and threw it in the quad cab, and it's still in there. Went on a nice ride the other day.
Speaking of comments and Messenger. Oh man.
No, it was a good time. So that 2018 motor after the dyno explosion, it's still kicking.
Yeah. It is.
It's when you start it up, and then you can tell that it's seen some racing because it doesn't sound quite so healthy, but put a little bit of heat in it, runs like a dream.
It got beat on. All of 2018. I mean,
It's been round and round and round. Oh, but that was really kind of the highlight points. I mean, that was the main thing I wanted to go over was in 2018. 2018 we ended up losing a good bit of the season because we tried the trans brake valve body setup because we were getting beat. We had a couple videos of us racing Dustin Jackson where he's trans brake, we're foot brake, and the smoke is 6 feet out of my stack, and while he still hasn't even launched yet. So the reaction time on the driver was there, but on the time slip, his reaction time.
That's your story, at least.
I got but the time slip, his reaction time was better. Which now that you start understanding foot brake versus trans brake, there's more things that play into it because we started data logging brake pressure, and you're leaving the line at 2,000 pounds of brake pressure. And it's 0.7 of a second before that brake pressure is down to below 100 PSI. So your brakes are dragging off when you're leaving. That slows your initial move down, whereas a trans brake is let off the button and roll, and it just makes it faster in the 60 foot, and that wins races.
I think the only highlight of 2018 UCC we should plug is probably the ether with the tires and Tom, or is it?
No, there's plenty of things we need. There's plenty of things about 2018 UCC that we need to talk about. I mean,
we talked about the fuel cut.
about the fuel issue, but then we did end up going. You said
788.
I mean,
and
it wasn't
181.
the prettiest pass ever either, because like the front half of that pass was
540.
521.
Is it 521?
Yeah. So, later that year we had gone substantially faster than that. So there was more left.
June of the previous year we'd gone 511.
Right.
So it wasn't even a great front half, but we did go
But it was
788.
still, I mean, I think still to date, it's the fastest quarter mile pass that a Pro Street truck's made, but nobody runs quarter mile anymore, which I'm glad they don't. That's too fast for that big a heavy truck, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But, so race day ended up going well after our almost disaster. The dyno, we once again, I want to say we got second maybe. I don't know for sure.
I think that's when Derek did 25. Because Derek sucked at the drag strip.
The biggest thing I remember about the dyno.
He had the trans problems all day.
right,
Never ran a good number, but then he redeemed himself. That's why the dyno scores so heavily. He made that monster number and was right back up top.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I remember that. Yeah, that's when.
But then the thing I remember from us on the dyno that year is looking back how stupid we were with nitrous on that thing. Like we had nitrous in it. We hadn't even checked to see how full our bottles were.
Yeah,
and
I had to
ended up.
I had to run back.
Yeah, we ended up trying. Well, I don't think we got
the
the other bottle then. Like, I don't think we had time.
We didn't have enough time.
We had 15 minutes on the dyno.
Man, I could have sworn we did, but maybe not.
I don't think we did.
I know, I feel like you went, but then in the end we were like, no, we just got to go. Like we don't have time.
Yeah.
Didn't have the bottles warm. There's so much stuff with nitrous that we just did stupid. And
well, we had done everything fuel only pretty much, and we were just we were not educated with nitrous.
Yeah.
We came a long way with our nitrous.
We could have a whole hour episode of just talking about nitrous, the things we've learned from it. But anyhow, so survived the dyno once again.
We did 2260 or something like that.
I mean, it was a decent number.
Second or third, because we were second, because that's when Sean had the rocker fall off and he couldn't figure out what it was, and he was white smoking and stuff.
Right.
Or broke a rocker, something like that, I think it was.
And then that year was actually,
it was supposed to be easy. It was pretty easy.
It was supposed to be real easy. And really, probably
all we had to do was just swap the sled pull stuff on
we just
Saturday
put our
night.
Whole AAM axles back in. That already had the gear ratios in it.
And we're supposed to, pretty much have the same dual setup as what we had the year before. Well, the year before we had loaners, and this year we went and bought our own. Had bought the same back spacing, had gotten the same tires. The one thing we hadn't done is we hadn't put 90-degree valve stems on the inner sled pole duals. So now the valve stem was hitting our brakes, and we felt like we couldn't do without brakes. And so we discover this at 1 o'clock at night. So we start brainstorming. Of course, nobody in the pits has a 90-degree valve stem that we can use. Finally found a Flying J like 40 minutes away that had some. So I remember making that drive, trying to pry my eyes open at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and got the valve stems, and then these duals are not the easiest things to mount and dismount because of the way the back spacing is. The barrel of the tire doesn't get, the barrel of the tire stays big so that you can clear brakes.
Yep.
It was just super difficult, but we ended up breaking down the tires.
On the gooseneck.
Yep, use the hydraulic.
Yeah.
Use the hydraulic jacks on the gooseneck to break the tires down. And
to pop the bead.
Yeah, to pop the bead.
This isn't going to work.
Yeah.
This isn't going to work.
Finally got them off.
I did. Every time I think of it, I mean, it's such a, just replaying it in my head. At the time, I was like, it's, whatever. But now, the longer it goes on, I think the funnier it gets. But
so that was the first disaster that night. And then couldn't get the bead. I don't know. We're trying to use ratchet straps and everything to get the bead set again. And one of the guys was over there struggling with it. And Cody was like, here, I can know how I can fix it. And they
were calling me dumb, basically, and that won't work, that won't work, that won't work. And I said, one little orange ratchet strap and a couple sniffs of John Deere ether, and it popped on. But
all right. And then I went to sleep at about 3 o'clock in the morning, so I could at least feel halfway rested for the next day. And I wake up at like 5 a.m. to all I hear is impact. Dude, it was like for 30 minutes. I'm like, it cannot take this long to put tires on. I'm like, something is going wrong. And turns out 916 slug nuts don't fit on 14 mil studs. Yeah. And they were shredding.
No, so, they got mixed in somehow.
Yeah. Well, so the whole deal is, I mean, there was...
It's embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, was so bad. There was 3 or 4 sets of spacers in between the duals and the back. So if you go, 4 spacers, that's 8 times 8. That's 64 lug nuts, and then you've got the 12 or 16 up front. So metric ton of them, and you're going through and you're putting all these together, and the last ones, like the nuts just don't want to go on. And so like they go part ways and then they don't. And so you don't have any other option other than to make them work. At least you don't think
they trying to make it work.
They got put on there.
I mean, we were all dead tired at this point, and just like, I mean, I was.
Wasn't that Sunday morning then when we called Evan Davis?
Yeah, it was Sunday morning, like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. He was coming from Ohio to help out with sled pull. I'm like, do you have spacers? He's like, yeah. I said, bring everything you got because we need some help.
Turns out this easy swap that we had took us all night.
Yeah. Literally all night.
It was supposed to be a midnight, 1 o'clock to be done. And
didn't you draw like number 1 or number 2 spot?
Yeah, number one spot.
We barely got it done in time to
because
make
it was
it there.
Sun was coming up at like 6 a.m. and there was nobody out there. I looked up and I think that was Rick was sleeping in the cab of the truck. We were checking shift.
Is that the night Travis Grovely smacked
that? weird because we had to weld those little buckets on the top because we hadn't. That was. I don't think you guys had put the.
For the
We
front.
had to put the factory springs over.
Did you guys had changed
coilovers.
You guys had
Coilovers, yeah.
changed some stuff on the front end from going to the 9 inches, and you hadn't fitted the AAM one. So we
From
had
being
those
so cheap, we should have just bought another set of shocks to put on the front. And anyhow, whatever.
But yeah, no,
Hindsight.
it was. But I mean, heck, first hook though. I mean,
Yeah. Well, and that really ended up.
Yeah,
that was
that's
the
good.
only great hook we ever had at UCC of the 3 years that we did it.
the first year we had a
first
great
year
hook,
was,
yeah.
it was
But-
a good hook. It just
It could have been better.
So hang on, we missed something.
Oh dear.
Because wasn't it that night that we saw Power Driven beating the head onto their engine with a hammer?
Insert picture.
That's not how that works. That's not how any of this works.
I think it was Travis Scramble took the video. They're in their trailer with a hammer beating the head on the engine, and we're like, what are they doing?
It was late. It was late though,
I know,
because
you're not supposed to beat a head onto an engine.
but it does go to show though, regardless of it, not supposed to do that. But I mean, I
There's
think
a lot of stuff we weren't supposed to do
no,
that we did.
I mean, there's
There's
a
a
you
lot
really
of things you do in the middle of the night when you,
you
have
really-
an engine
yeah,
you need to make
you're-
run.
But that's the
it's
stuff that
going
happens
together.
at those challenges. That's just look back at it and it's funny because it's just hilarious. We're like, we did that.
like we joke about cross threads or no threads. Well, you know, we try. You know, unfortunately, it's not that that's but sometimes it's just I
It's
think
the,
that's how it
the
happens.
can do, make
Yeah.
do, must get it done attitude is what carries you through events like that.
really
Because
is.
if you don't have that attitude and everything has to be like picture perfect, and you're going to be behind. You're not going to win.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're just better than us. That's all there's to it. 'Cause we always tried to have our things together, and it just never all worked out that way. But
Yeah. I mean,
Anyway.
all in all, you know, finishing wise, definitely 2018 was our best finishing. Like we got a first, a second, and a first, I believe.
right.
Yep.
So that turned out to be a great year. Obviously, we still had our hiccups and kind of things that, you know, were a little bit lucky here and
Right.
there. But
Who that year got second place?
I think it was Derek
was
Rose.
it the same guy that got second place? Like
I think
Couple
this
times
is
before
this
or
is gonna be his
something, or-
third year getting third or second place now.
something like that. I don't know.
That sounds about
Hey,
right.
repeat for second, baby. It's way. I'm sorry. All right, maybe
Poor Derek.
we'll cut that one out a little bit.
Love you, Derek.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why we call him second place Derek. But he did get to win. I mean,
He did.
we didn't
He
come
did.
back
He
2019,
did
so we
win.
we threw him a bone. You know?
Oh man, but it's all good fun.
Yeah, it's good stuff. But this year will be a bloodbath.
It will.
But,
That's
that's another
That's
topic.
another- that's
so
another video.
Justin Ziegler has our old Pro Street now, and he's going back to UCC. And with a big setup, and Derek Rose now has a billet block in his truck with a big setup, and Chris Patterson has actually hit 3,000 horsepower on a chassis dyno, and he's coming back to play. So, and in this 2022 UCC, they can substitute another truck for the sled pull. It just has to have a factory frame. So pretty much you're going to see these guys dyno and then drag race, or drag race and then dyno. And they're going to go on the dyno knowing that they don't have to use their truck for the sled pull because they can substitute another truck in.
Yeah.
And the reason they did that is to try to attract more competitors because they were having problems finding enough people as dumb as us to be able to go out and do these events. And so that's why they wanted to say, hey, look, there's all these drag trucks that make a lot of power. If we would let people substitute a sled pull truck, then the drag racers could be able to enter this competition, substitute a sled pull truck, and they could put on a better show for the people. It kind of changes the dynamics of UCC of what it originally started at, but that's how it's going to go. But it's going to be a bloodbath at UCC this year because these guys are going to not care if their engines are leaving parts on the ground because they don't need it for the next day. So it's going to be a show.
It is. It is funny. I think maybe something you could even say on it because I know I've said it. Like a lot of people, I guess, not to carry it on, but like on the internet. Prime example, people, you know, the whole, trash talking with each other. You know, I think we're all a little bit probably guilty of it, but it's all in good fun. Like I think that's
Right.
not to bring that into it, but it is a thing. Without that good like friendly competition, like
Right.
it makes it more fun because like I could call Derek Rose and we could have a 4-hour conversation about whatever it is, but if I needed if we needed parts for Justin's truck or one of our trucks or whatnot, he'd be the first to give us
Right.
parts or hand. It's vice versa on that.
But when
So-
he's on the goose on Fat Saturday night,
he's gonna toss
some mad crap.
Juice and Gatorade. That attitude comes out in a heartbeat. But no, it's just it's good time.
It does make it fun, and that's why we always want to compete with all of our heart and be fierce competitors. But we want to have a good time doing it because it's not making friends in this industry has been what has made this journey so like. It keeps the drive alive, really, because it's what makes it fun to go to events. But
Yeah.
this year, if you want to come to the Ultimate Callout Challenge, if you buy tickets, please use the Firepunk discount code. Firepunk. But the main reason is we're hosting our Outlaw Diesel Revenge event, ODSS points racing, at UCC. And that is the only way that we can really justify affording hosting this because UCC kind of takes all the diesel sponsors. And so we don't really have sponsors for our own event. But if people buy UCC tickets using our code, then we get a little portion of the ticket sales, and that helps cover some of our expenses. So we can really do this for the diesel community. There's no monetary benefit for us other than just having a good event and bringing everybody together. So that's kind of the goal this year, is to be able to have a really big event. You get all the UCC action, plus you get all the ODSS drag racing action. All the fastest guys are there. So if you come out to Indy, it's June 5th through June 7th, I think this year.
3 through 5.
Yeah.
Even last
3 through 5, June 3rd through June 5th in Indy.
Yeah.
It'll be
It's
a big
one
show.
of the like last year having it there for the first time like that I don't know, it was probably the best diesel event that I'd been
Right.
granted
But you
being a
get
part
it
of
all.
it, but
I mean,
like
you
it
get
really
the
is.
highest
It's
horsepower
fun.
dynos. You get the fastest drag
This is
strip,
a year to be here though. Like
Yeah,
it's
it'll
be a year it's gonna be cutthroat. It's gonna be good competition.
It'll be good.
So
that should pretty much wrap up the UCC side of stuff for us. Next video, we'll talk about selling the Pro Street truck, building the Pro Mod, and kind of through current, I guess, with the Pro Mod. And
that'll be a long video.
Yeah,
on that one.
there'll be lots of stories on that. But yeah, I think that pretty much does it for this one. Make sure you guys keep your eyes open for the next video. Should drop next week. And make sure you like and subscribe if you want to be notified of all our videos.
And again, if you got other questions you want us to address, drop it in the comments and we'll address it and go from there.